Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, let me welcome you all to this year's United Nations Forum on the Question of Palestine under the theme entitled International Parliamentarian Support to the Question of Palestine, organized by United Nations Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People. My name is Sheikh Nyang. I'm the permanent representative of Senegal to the United Nations here in New York, and I'm chair of the committee. I'll be chairing today's event. We are holding today's event via Interprefi to ensure live interpretation into 5 official UN languages, and you can choose the language through the platform. The forum is also live streamed on UN TV, as well as on UN Facebook and UN Twitter. On UN TV, you can also select interpretation in the language of your choice. After the initial introductory remarks by myself, on behalf of the committee and the representative of the United Nations and the State of Palestine, I will hand over the reins to the moderator of today's panels, Mr. Pedro Roque, Vice President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean. Mr. Roque will facilitate both panels back to back, and after the second panel, we'll field the questions from the member states and the audience. On behalf of the committee, I would like to request the esteemed colleagues from the member states to pose questions and make short statements. We also welcome written statements to be sent to the Division for Palestinian Rights, who will upload them to the page on today's event on the committee website. This year, the committee's annual UN Forum on the Question of Palestine aims at highlighting the work of parliamentarians throughout the world to support the attainment of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people and promote a just resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in peace and security. This event follows a meeting in November of last year with parliamentarians on the question of Palestine. Today, our esteemed speakers, parliamentarians from around the world, will focus on parliamentarian support for 2 issues. Firstly, the full implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 2334/2016, including through incorporation of its requirements into national legislation. And secondly, the revival of multilateral efforts for a peaceful resolution of the conflict. For this discussion, it is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Alexandre Boulris, Member of Parliament of Canada, Mr. Francisco Chahuan, Senator of Chile, Mrs. Julie Elliott, Member of Parliament of the United Kingdom, Mr. Hubert Julien Laferrière, member of the French National Assembly, Mr. Solomon Lechesa Senoli, Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly of South Africa. I would also like to use this opportunity to give a warm welcome to the audience following us via different platforms. And while the representatives of member states will be able to ask their questions in the Interprefi platform, the global audience is invited to do so via the committee's Facebook channel by sending an email to dpr/meeting@un.org or via WhatsApp at +1 646 421 0579. Everyone is also encouraged to tweet the committee hashtag Rights for Palestine. Rights for Palestine, for like number. Before giving the floor to the moderator and our panelists, let me say a few words about our committee, followed by remarks from the UN Under-Secretary General for Political and Peace Building Affairs, Mrs. Rose Marie DiCarlo, whom I greet here warmly, and the permanent observer of the State of Palestine to the United Nations in New York, His Excellency Minister Riyad Mansour, whom also I greet most warmly. Our committee, which is the United Nations Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, was established by the UN General in 1975 to pursue the following main goals: promoting a just and peaceful settlement to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and end to the Israeli occupation, realizing the two-state solution, Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace within secure and recognized borders, and supporting the exercise of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, including self-determination, sovereignty, and right to return. We implement our mandate by raising awareness on the question of Palestine through a range of activities, among them events and conferences at UN headquarters here in New York and abroad, a capacity building program for the State of Palestine, and the annual observance of the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people on the 29th of November. Parliamentarians have helped to raise awareness on the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, working to incorporate international obligations embedded in the UN relevant resolutions, the Arab Peace Initiative, and bilateral agreements, international legislation. They have promoted diplomatic recognition by the respective governments of the State of Palestine and the implementation of international law via their oversight role over the executive branch in their countries, as well as turning civil society advocacy into concrete policies. In addition, parliamentarians also voted to incorporate international and supranational budgets, much needed Palestinian people. Chile, host of one of the biggest Palestinian diaspora communities, recognized the State of Palestine in 2011, and President Sebastián Piñera has conducted two-state visits to Ramallah. In July 2020, the Chilean Senate approved a resolution calling on the president to adopt a law boycotting settlement goods and banning commercial activity with companies that operate there. Also in July 2020, in France, over 100 members of parliament called for a government and the European Union at large to impose sanctions on Israel over its annexation policy and to recognize the state of Palestine. In South Africa, parliamentarians were requested to provide guidance to Palestinian civil society groups as they advocate at the UN Human Rights Council for the revival of the UN Center Against Apartheid to address the situation in the OPT. In the United Kingdom in February of this year, 81 MPs called on the foreign minister to put pressure on Israel to stop the eviction of Palestinian families from their homes in East Jerusalem, a situation that has not yet been resolved, and in recent days and weeks only exacerbated to conflict with ongoing conflict throughout East Jerusalem. And these are just a few examples of the work of parliamentarians to advocate for the exercise of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people. I'm looking forward to learning how we as UN representatives in the Palestinian Rights Committee can deepen our partnership, support your work as parliamentarians across the world, and what you would want us to do here at UN headquarters. The events of the past days and weeks show again the importance of our work. As communicated in our statement of 10 May, the committee is deeply alarmed by the dramatic deterioration of the situation in the OPT that includes the escalation of violence and acts of provocation and incitement, particularly by Israeli extremists in occupied East Jerusalem and Israel's military escalation in the Gaza Strip. I am today here reiterating the committee's call for de-escalation. The Security Council, in particular, must shoulder its responsibilities under the Charter and act swiftly to uphold its resolutions on the question of Palestine. We are also calling on the Secretary General to continue his good offices and mediation capacities and stand ready to provide assistance. The international community has an abiding responsibility towards the question of Palestine until it is resolved in all its aspects, in accordance with international law and the relevant UN resolutions, and must act without delay to salvage the prospects for a just solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and lasting peace and security. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'm now giving the floor to the UN Under-Secretary General for Political and Peace Building Affairs, Mrs. Rose Marie DiCarlo. We are honored to see you here, USG, at an event of the committee, and I give you the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excellencies, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the United Nations Forum on the question of Palestine. We convene at a time of grave concern over the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory and in Israel. Clashes and violence in occupied East Jerusalem, as well as the launching of rockets from the Gaza Strip towards Israel, followed by Israeli airstrikes on Gaza, have dramatically deteriorated an already fragile situation. The fighting has claimed more than 200 lives, including children. The suffering, damage, and destruction are immense. The scenes of communal violence within Israel have been unprecedented. Continued escalation of the situation will have devastating consequences for Palestinians and Israelis, as well as for the region. Humanitarian needs are bound to rise considerably, particularly in Gaza, where the situation was already desperate due to long years of closures, inter-Palestinian divisions, recurring hostilities, and the COVID-19 pandemic. Excellencies, the United Nations has been actively involved in mediation efforts with all sides, with a view to ending the violence immediately. I echo the Secretary General's call on the parties to allow for the intensification of mediation efforts, which are also crucial for delivering much needed humanitarian aid to the affected people in Gaza. I commend those member states who have intensified their diplomatic efforts to bring the parties from the brink. The international community must do all it can to de-escalate the situation immediately, urge the parties to end the hostilities, and chart a path toward negotiation. This recent escalation is a tragic reminder of the urgency of a viable political path toward ending this conflict once and for all. All relevant international actors, including the Middle East Quartet, should do their utmost to revitalize the peace process, which remains the only path toward a just and lasting solution. In the absence of such a process, we are, regrettably, bound to witness more episodes of tensions and desperation. People on both sides deserve much more than that. The ongoing hostilities are also taking place against the backdrop of rising tensions and violence in occupied East Jerusalem, where hundreds of Palestinian residents of Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan neighborhoods are under threat of eviction from their homes. These evictions are pending final court rulings. If implemented, they would constitute a violation of international law. I join the Secretary General in urging Israel to halt demolitions and evictions in line with its obligations under international humanitarian and human rights law. Excellencies, parliamentarians, through their legislative power and advocacy, can play a crucial role in reinforcing the global consensus on the two-state solution, a solution in accordance with international law, relevant United Nations resolutions, and bilateral agreements based on 1967 lines with Jerusalem as the capital of both states. I hope that the forum today will create a shared understanding of the urgency to act resolutely on the question of Palestine. Let me reiterate the call by the Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process to members of the Middle East Quartet, key Arab and international partners, as well as to the Israeli and Palestinian leadership, to intensify and strengthen efforts to return to meaningful negotiations toward a viable two-state solution. I can assure you that the United Nations will continue to do all that we can to support a peaceful resolution of the question of Palestine. I wish you a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
I thank USG DiCarlo for her remarks. I would like also to request that you please convey our gratitude and thanks to the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for the support given to the Committee and the Division for Palestinian Rights at the UN Secretariat. I understand that USG DiCarlo will need to leave before the official end of today's event. I would like once again to thank her for her participation. It is now my honor and my pleasure to ask my colleague and friend, His Excellency Minister Riyad Mansour, permanent observer of the State of Palestine to the United Nations in New York, to deliver his remarks. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for organizing this very important event. And also, I want to express my happiness to see Madame DiCarlo with us, speaking on behalf of the Secretary General. I welcome her. And I welcome all those who will be participating in presenting statements from all corners of the globe, representing different parliaments. Of course, we meet today at a very tragic moment, facing this massive aggression by the Israeli occupying forces against our people everywhere, on both sides of the Green Line, and particularly in occupied Jerusalem, specifically in Al-Aqsa Mosque and Al-Haram al-Sharif, in Sheikh Jarrah, Silwan, and all parts of Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip, in all parts of the occupied land of the State of Palestine. This aggression so far resulted in 213 Palestinians being murdered in the Gaza Strip alone, and the number is increasing by the hour. Among them, 61 children, 36 women, 16 elderlies, and close to 1,500 wounded, and more than 7,000 buildings either damaged or destroyed, including a number of high-rise buildings. In Jerusalem and the West Bank, more than 30 Palestinians have been killed, and close to 4,000 have been injured, and the numbers are rising by the moment. Inside Israel itself, about 1,000 Palestinians who are citizens of the State of Israel are in jail. A number of them, including undead, have been lynched by this racist apartheid regime. They are attacking everything that is related to Palestine and to the Palestinian people. And our people are resisting and revolting against this repression that lasted for way too long, for 53 plus years of occupation and 73 years of Nakba, but yet not a single one of them raising a white flag. What we need from all of you, including our guests, the parliamentarians, we need two things, and also from the UN. We need a political effort to stop this crime against our people and to stop this aggression immediately. Shame on the Security Council that met several times and was unable even to say a single word in an official document against this aggression and to stop this aggression, although there is consensus among them calling for stopping this aggression and for a ceasefire, but yet when it comes to produce a product, they do not agree to that because of one country that is not allowing the Security Council to speak with one voice. That's why the General Assembly will meet on Thursday. So what we need from you, a political effort with your government in influencing Israel, the UN in influencing Israel to stop this carnage against our people and to stop it immediately. Other thing that we want from you is from the Secretary General to issue immediately an emergency call for humanitarian assistance to the tragedy that exists in the Gaza Strip. About 50,000 people plus are displaced in Gaza and they are running to schools of UNRWA, the 43 of them, and trying to seek protection under the flag of the United Nations. But yet they need to eat, they need medicine, they need inoculation against the pandemic, they need blankets, they need ambulances, they need doctors, they need all these things that we call for and mobilize to provide during the time of catastrophes, whether natural one or man-made one like this one that we are facing. So I call upon all of you who are with us to raise in your parliament, to raise with your government, politically add your efforts to stop this crime against our people and ask your government to help as fast as possible to do it through the many agencies of the United Nations that are on the ground, especially UNRWA, to attend and to cater to the needs of our people at this critical moment of this crime that is unfolding before our eyes. Palestinian people need to be protected. The United Nations can do certain things in order to provide to that. And we will discuss many of these details with the Secretary General with the UN in the days to come. Protection should be provided for our people. Those who are fixated on the right of Israel to defend itself, they should remember that we live under occupation. We live under a system of apartheid and discrimination. We are attacked in our holy sites while our people praying in Al-Aqsa Mosque during the holy month of Ramadan. We are the ones that our land is being stolen from us to create settlements, to displace people in Sheikh Jarrah, and to destroy buildings on the top of heads of families in the Gaza Strip, in which a number of families were killed, including their children while they were sleeping. So those who think of only of Israel, think of your responsibility to protect the vulnerable people under occupation. What would you do if you are under occupation? What would you do if your land is being stolen from you? What would you do if you are deprived from the right to pray in your mosque and in your churches? What would you do if you are treated in a dehumanized way, as we see in all these places, including in Lid, in Ramle, in Jaffa, in Akka, in Haifa, in all these cities inside Israel? And let me conclude, once the ceasefire is arranged, and I hope it happens immediately, and we ask you to help us to let it happen immediately. Business as usual cannot address the situation. Reiterating statements with good positions, which we appreciate, cannot, address the reality. What we need, this occupation has to end, and it has to end now. Anything short of that will be preparation for the next cycle of violence and confrontation. Israel cannot continue to be spoiled and treated above the law. There has to be accountability, and there has to be consequences for all these crimes. And it is the responsibility of all of us, especially in the international community, in the United Nations, and in your countries, to elevate yourself to the point that enough is enough and this occupation has to end, and the Palestinian people should enjoy independence in their own state with East Jerusalem as its capital, to live in dignity and to live in freedom. Anything short of that, the writing is on the wall. This is now the fifth time we have this war happening. If we do not change our conduct, if we do not implement what we agreed to in the resolutions at the United Nations on the basis of international law, you are not sending the message that should be sent to Israel, and they are not listening to anyone. And I sincerely hope that the ICC to begin their investigation over these war crimes committed by the occupying power against our people, whether it is the war crime of settlements or the war crime against our people in the Gaza Strip. I want to thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and the committee, and the division, and all those, the thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands, who are watching us through, the facilities provided to us by the United Nations, to be able to listen to this discussion and to contribute to it and to share with their followers, tell the tragedy of the Palestinian people and the bravery of the Palestinian people and their resiliency and steadfastness until we collectively succeed in putting an end to occupation and side with the rights of the Palestinians. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank Minister Mansour for his remarks and for his update on the situation on the ground, on this alarming, horrific situation on the ground. And on behalf of the committee, I would like once again to assure you of our continued support for the achievement of the full exercise by the Palestinian people of its inalienable rights. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I now have the pleasure to hand over the microphone to the moderator of today's event, Mr. Pedro Roque, the President Emeritus and current Vice President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean, a long-standing partner of the committee. Mr. Roque is a Member of Parliament of Portugal and Chair of the Standing Committee on Social Security and Labour. He is the Secretary General of the Social Democratic Workers' Movement and a former Secretary of State for Employment. On the question of Palestine, the Portuguese Parliament has already, in December 2014, called on its government to recognize the state of Palestine, and over the years passed many votes of solidarity with the cause of the Palestinian people. As an example of Portugal's stance, most recently in December 2020, its foreign minister reaffirmed that it would relocate its embassy to Jerusalem only when the city is the capital of both Israel and the state of Palestine, when he paid a joint visit to both Israel and Palestine. Mr. Roque, it is my honor and my pleasure to have you with us today. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ambassador Nyang. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I wish to thank the UN Palestinian Rights Committee for the organization of this event and for the kind invitation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean to moderate the discussion. This debate comes at a critical time, as demonstrated once again by the recent surge in violence and military confrontation in the Middle East. The status quo of the Palestinian question is unacceptable. In the absence of a permanent political solution, the situation will continue to result in violence, anger, resentment, civilian suffering and death, and violations of the rights of people to live in peace, security, and dignity. We especially support the initiative of the committee to turn to parliamentarians to mobilize the political momentum for respect of the international law and the urgent need to resume efforts to arrive to a two-state solution. For those who may not know, both Israel and Palestine are equal and founding members of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean, and both hold vice presidencies in the PAM Political Bureau, which has afforded our Assembly to facilitate a constant channel for dialogue, not only between Israel and Palestine, but also among all their neighbors in the Euro-Mediterranean and Gulf regions. Through this dialogue, our Assembly came to a single and clear consensus. A two-state solution is the only way for both peoples, Israelis and Palestinians, to achieve their legitimate aspirations to govern themselves, to live side by side within safe and recognized borders in peace and security in accordance with the relevant international resolutions. This consensus has been adopted unanimously by all PAM parliaments in a dedicated resolution reaffirming that there is indeed political will and consensus at the regional parliamentary level to work towards and achieve a permanent two-state solution in the Middle East. Dear colleagues, before we begin with the panels, a quick word on the proceedings. We will hold both panels back to back and then followed by follow with a cumulative question and answer session. The member states participating through Interprofy can use their microphones and cameras, as well as the chat box, to request the floor and make their interventions. The wider audience across the globe is invited to pose their questions via the committee's Facebook channels or by email or WhatsApp. We now move to the first panel on the topic Parliament's Security Council Resolution 2334 of 2016 and Israeli settlements calls for accountability. It is therefore my pleasure to open this panel, which will be focused on the role of parliaments in the implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 2334. In this resolution, adopted in late 2016, the Security Council was clear on issues of borders, East Jerusalem, the importance of arriving at a two-state solution, protection of civilians, and creating the conditions necessary for promoting peace. The events of recent days and weeks clearly demonstrate that failure to respect international law will only lead to violence and escalation. I would now like to give the floor to our first speaker, Mrs. Juliet Elliott. Mrs. Elliott is a UK Member of Parliament from the Labour Party, representing her district of Sunderland Central since 2010. She is also chair of the Labour Friends of Palestine and the Middle East. Madam, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And it's a great pleasure to be with everyone today and have the opportunity to speak with you. When I agreed to speak today, I could not have known the situation that would be currently happening in the occupied territories of Palestine and in Israel. And it just brings into stark focus what the people living in that area are dealing with every day. As has been said, this is the fifth time, I think, since 2000 that war has descended on the area, and it is not a war of equals. It is a war of unequals, and I think we should never forget that. And we should also not forget that at the current time, there are many hundreds of innocent people women, children being killed and injured on all sides of the divide. But overwhelmingly, the numbers are of more Palestinian people. And that is the story that has happened on every occasion this has happened. And very, very tragically, yesterday, the COVID testing station at the Al Marar clinic, the only testing station for COVID in Gaza, was put out of action. So this war at this particular time is happening against the backdrop of this world pandemic that none of us have experienced in our lifetimes, and the people suffering on the ground are suffering disproportionately in a way that we can't imagine living in the areas that we live in. And as has been said, I chair Labour Friends of Palestine in the Middle East in the UK. I also chair the all-party parliamentary group for Britain and Palestine, and recently started to chair a group of networking of European parliamentarians, which the whole focus of that grouping is the upholding of international law. There have been many occasions in the last year where various issues have been raised around the issues facing the occupied territories, particularly in the UK Parliament. I've spoken in debates, I've asked questions. I asked a question last week on not just bringing a ceasefire as soon as possible to the area, but also bringing those responsible for the violence on all sides to justice and having some accountability. Because every time this happens, a ceasefire happens, but there seems to be no accountability. And if there's no accountability moving forward, then we'll be here in another 2-3 years' time, and the same situation will happen again. A ceasefire will not bring lasting peace to the region. What needs to happen is an end to annexation. The status quo that is often talked about is not the status quo. It is a creeping annexation by the back door that is happening all the time, that every day makes a two-state solution, the solution I think everyone wants, more and more difficult, if not impossible to achieve. So I think we need to look beyond this. A ceasefire will come, and I hope it comes today, because every minute that this conflict goes on, more and more innocent people are being killed and injured. But a ceasefire will come, but we need to address the underlying cause of what is going on and the reality of the situation facing people living in the region every day. I want to go through some of the things that the Britain-Palestine all-party group have asked for in recent days. Everyone is devastated by the current events that are going on, and international law and accountability need to be fully adhered to by all parties. At the moment, that isn't happening. The UK government need to support what is going on in the ICC. At the moment, they're not. That needs to happen. All those who violate international law and commit war crimes should be aware that the International Criminal Court can and should prosecute. Israel needs to end all violations of the Fourth Geneva Convention in occupied East Jerusalem and the rest of the West Bank. And Israel needs to allow Palestinians the full right to freedom of assembly and to mobilise against human rights abuses, free from fear of unlawful force and violence. The situation we saw at the mosque last week was dreadful, and we should never see such things again. Israel must desist from use of force deployed inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It was an appalling sight, and in the holy month of Ramadan, totally unacceptable. And there must be agreement regarding the holy places in Jerusalem, that they are fully restored, access to them is fully restored, and everybody's right to practice and visit their religious sites must be respected without fear or favour. That is not the situation at the moment, and that needs to happen. Hamas and other groups firing rockets must cease immediately into civilian areas. It constitutes a war crime. And Israeli actions to stop rockets in Gaza must be taken only in full compliance with international law. which is not what we are seeing at the moment. I press, and the all-party group in Britain presses, that the UK government should end sale of arms to Israel that could be used in the subjugation of the Palestinian population in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. All parties, as has been mentioned before, should facilitate the continuous free flow of humanitarian agencies and goods. There is a humanitarian crisis happening in Gaza on a scale that I don't think any of us have seen before. These are real people who are really suffering, and the humanitarian needs of those people need to be met. The occupation has gone on now for 54 years, and there has been 14 years since the blockade of Gaza. It's gone on far too long. We need, as an international community, to put pressure on all of our governments to seize this moment, to make this the turning point that we all work so hard for, to get real peace in the area and strike a situation of a two-state solution, which is the only way forward. The blockade in Gaza must stop, and the support for UNRWA is absolutely fundamental to the lives of Palestinian people. The work UNRWA have done for the Palestinian people is exceptional against hugely difficult circumstances, and the difficulties they've faced with funding in recent months must be addressed. UNRWA must be strengthened in order to do more to help the Palestinian people. We also call for the holding of free and fair presidential and parliamentary Palestinian elections throughout the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. This is essential to move forward and end Israel's systematic discrimination against Palestinians, including its own Palestinian citizens, a root cause of the anger and frustration witnessed, particularly on the streets of Israeli cities such as Lod, Acre, and Haifa. The situation we face, the UN resolutions that pass, are evident to everybody. I support all of the UN resolutions that pass on this issue, particularly 2334. However, we can pass resolutions continually, and without action, nothing changes on the ground, or rather, things do change on the ground for the Palestinian people in a negative way. Nothing seems to resolve the situation, and we must, as I said before, seize this opportunity to make this the turning point, to make this the point that the international community and governments of all persuasions around the world put pressure on the Israeli government to stop their actions, to stop Hamas and the rockets, and actually work to stop the continued expansion of settlements and bring real peace to the region for all parties concerned. Thank you for listening to me this afternoon, and I look forward to listening to other colleagues and speakers and to the question and answer session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Elliott, for your introductory remarks. I would now like to give the floor to our next speaker, Mr. Francisco Chaguán, a Chilean lawyer and a politician of Palestinian origin. Since 2010, he is a senator representing District 6, Valparaiso region. Before that, from 2006 to 2010, he was a deputy for District 14, Viña del Mar and Concón. He is also the vice presidency of the Renovation National Party. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Today, we have before us at issue the quality of the United Nations, the ability, rather, of the United Nations to implement the resolutions both of the General Assembly and the Security Council. Today, what is at stake are the coercive measures to ensure the enforcement of these resolutions and international law. What is at stake today is the practice of the veto by major powers in the United Nations Security Council. This is inspired by a post-Second World War scenario. Today, multilateralism indeed requires the commitment of the entire international community in order to resolve, in the terms that which inspired the Charter of the United Nations, peace for the world, and especially for Palestine. In this regard, Israeli settlements on Palestinian territory were declared illegal for the first time in 1997, and more recently, Resolution 2334 of the Security Council of 2016 also did so. However, until now, the Israeli government has scoffed at all of these resolutions, seeing settlements as a fundamental part of the Israeli colonization process, particularly inspired by Resolution 2334/2016, which reaffirms the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, particularly Resolutions 242 and 238, make it possible for us to clearly indicate the unacceptability of the acquisition of territory by force. This is also based on the Charter of the United Nations itself in point 4 of the second article, and it has a background in the 10th article of the Pact of the League of Nations, and prior to that, of course, in the Treaty of Paris itself, which requires the international community to be able to condemn the acts which inspire the creation of Israeli settlements on occupied Palestinian territory. Amnesty International itself has indicated that here Israel has attempted to invoke the law of the jungle, so to speak. And in this regard, it is important to indicate that this also is a breach of Article 29 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which establishes that the occupying power shall not conduct the evacuation or transfer or part of the civilian population to the territory occupied by it. It also forbids mass or individual transfers of a forced nature, such as the deportation of people who are protected in the occupied territory. The transfer of civilians by the occupying power to the occupied territory is a war crime. We have also indicated that this has other precedents. The Stimson Doctrine of the U.S. Secretary of State of 1932, which was applied to the conquest of Ethiopia by Italy in 1936, and the occupation of Austria, Czechoslovakia by Germany, and the annexation of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia by the Soviet Union. In another precedent, the Rio de Janeiro Treaty, subscribed by Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Mexico, Paraguay, and Uruguay, and which was also signed by Spain, the Buenos Aires agreements, and the Chapultepec Agreement, signed by the Inter-American Conference on Issues of War and Peace, in its 8th resolution for its part, ratifies the right of every state to its integrity and its territorial inviolability. We go back to this point that the situation of settlement and colonization of occupied Palestinian territory, which is happening today, which has situations such as in the Jordan Valley, one of the most resource natural resource-rich areas of Palestine, where 10,000 Israeli settlers consume the equivalent of water consumed by 1.5 million Palestinian citizens. The occupation is for economic reasons. More than half of the products are exported. This includes agricultural and industrial products as well as cosmetics produced with Dead Sea derivatives. The Dead Sea is completely controlled and exploited by Israel, even though it is in Palestinian territory. But we have also seen a practice of holding political prisoners. This is one of the forms of control which Israel has over the Palestinian population. It is by arresting those who have political activities or who express themselves against the occupation. A large number of Palestinian political prisoners are arrested and held under administrative detention without specific charges and without any guarantee of a due process. Furthermore, most Palestinian civilians are brought before military tribunals, which does not meet the minimum requirements of due process. Right now, there are 6,000 political prisoners, over 300 of whom are all girls. This is an infringement of basic standards of human rights established in the Universal Charter of the United Nations, established in 1945 on various international agreements, such as the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Agreement for the Prevention of Cruel, Inhuman, and Unusual Punishment, as well as the Treaty on the Rights of the Child. Then there is the apartheid wall. Israel started building it in 2002 without prejudice to the fact that it is not built on the Green Line, which is internationally recognized, but within occupied Palestinian territory. The International Court of Justice declared this wall illegal in 2004. The United Nations, in its resolution 1013, demanded that the construction of the wall stop immediately. The apartheid wall divides Palestinians from Palestinians. It separates families and cities. Thousands of people have ended up isolated. They are denied basic rights because of the wall. Among the rights infringed is the right to the freedom of movement. Despite the many resolutions of the international community, Israel continues to expand the wall to extend its length. It is right now 800 kilometers long. It is 9 meters high in some places. It makes no sense as a national security measure for Israel because of its extension. It is a simple excuse to impose the occupation and to infringe the rights of the Palestinian people. A wall is an example of apartheid. Al Khalim in the West Bank was divided into two halves, with half under the Palestinian Authority and the other half governed by the occupying power. The city has a population of 200,000 Palestinians and 1,000 Israeli settlers. However, it is controlled by the Israeli army, and there's a large number of checkpoints. Hebron has one of the most complex situations. Then there's the situation of the refugees. We have over 5 million Palestinian refugees, according to UNRWA. By refugees, we mean those people whose residence in Palestine between who were resident in Palestine between 1945 and 1948 and who lost their homes because of the occupation, as well as their descendants. Resolution 194 of the General Assembly established the right to return. This is part of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people. Until today, it has not been possible to have this right respected. Yes, indeed, we are facing an apartheid today, as Jimmy Carter, in his book of 2005, Palestine Peace, Not Apartheid, indicated. The same position is taken by several human rights organizations, as well as the 2017 report entitled Israeli Practices Against the Palestinian People and the Issue of Apartheid. This apartheid, this discrimination, affects not only Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza and in East Jerusalem, but also Palestinians who are citizens of Israel today and who live in cities such as Akko or Galilee or in other Arab cities inside Israel. This is why it is so important ultimately to understand that we are looking at a crime against humanity. The report of Human Rights Watch speaks of the indisputable nature of the crime of apartheid against Palestinians. This could be a turning point for the defense of the legitimate claims of the Palestinian people and the role of the international community, which international organizations and my country, as one which has defended multilateralism, full respect for international humanitarian law, and the full scope of international law to bring to trial crimes against humanity, such as apartheid, is key. The report unequivocally states that the crime against humanity of apartheid and persecution was committed by Israel. And these crimes are present and are being committed on the occupied Palestinian territory. We wish to make some recommendations so that countries can stand in solidarity with Palestine. First, to encourage through foreign ministries the establishment through the United Nations of an international commission to investigate the discrimination and systematic oppression based on the domination of one racial group over another in the occupied territories. They should have the mandate of establishing the facts and identifying those responsible for grave crimes of apartheid and persecution. They should enable and sponsor the creation of a UN committee made up of member states in order to investigate the findings of the international investigative body and to recommend the implementation of its finding. To recommend, because of the stalemate of the issue in the UN Security Council, that member states and blocs of member states impose unilateral selective sanctions, making it possible to generate enough international pressure to impose peace, achieve a lasting, fair peace under the terms of Resolution 2334 and make it possible to achieve the coexistence of two states within internationally recognized and defined borders. And lastly, to establish through the United Nations the role of United Nations envoy for the prosecution of crimes of apartheid, to identify the steps which states and legal bodies must take to prosecute these crimes. Lastly, we recommend that parliamentarians attending today make it possible to generate the conditions to review the treaties with Israel, so they include a specific reference to the borders of Israel, recognized as the previous ones on the 4th of June of 1967, in accordance with Resolution 2334 of the Security Council.
It's absolutely necessary that signing any agreement with Israel needs to be just with the borders of 1967, to not use the settlements, ultimately, which exist in Palestine occupied territory as raw material for exports or anything to be exported, to ensure that they have quality of facts in Israel. Finally, for possible investments or those who want to visit the zone, they need to understand the context of the place. Prohibit entry to those countries of products produced by Israeli settlements in the occupied territories of Palestine, and use the United Nations for negotiations of human rights, banning, again, companies linked to international humanitarian law have access and regularize the promotion of tourism between Israel and Palestine to ensure that there are that no one is duped. Also ensure that no organization would do something that would benefit one country and restrict others due to the Israeli occupation of Palestine. Finally, take concrete measures against discrimination of citizens that they suffer when they want to visit Palestine, including those who want to study, work, or visit family members in Palestine, especially those who are of Palestinian origin. Each parliament, in not recognizing, you have to make sure that that prevent abuses against citizens who are not a security problem, may stop the abuses and discrimination. Each country can take concrete action, which would include the principle of reciprocity. We have been clear and categorical on this. The only way to ensure peace, a fair, lasting, and general peace, is through a two-state solution. Ultimately, then we would be able to impose, through multilateralism, a solution which is based on international law. And the Security Council resolutions and international humanitarian law and the Geneva Convention. We have been firm and categorical in two aspects. First, through draft agreements, that path through the Senate and the Chamber of Deputies. They establish in a clear and categorical manner the motive of the pandemic of COVID-19 has led to suffering for all of humanity. The occupying power under Article 56 of the Fourth Geneva Convention can establish all measures and conditions as necessary for the Palestinian population of the occupied territories to be vaccinated as soon as possible. Moreover, the situation in Gaza specifically, which is the most open area of where the highest concentration of people in the world. We've also been firm and categorical in this respect, insisting that annexation plans of the occupied Palestinian territory is a flagrant violation of international law, and it is a war crime. We have also substantiated that the international criminal system is here in the background. If it cannot recognize that war crimes and genocide and apartheid produced in the occupied Palestinian territories are also investigation worthy. A few days ago, we had a first statement issued or sentence ruling issued by the International Criminal Court, which indicates that war crimes which took place on the Palestine occupied territory should be investigated. Finally, I'd like to point out that we have an opportunity for peace here. And as President Arafat said in the General Assembly of the United Nations, let us not allow the olive branch, which is a promise of a lasting, fair, and comprehensive peace, fall from our hands. That's why it's important to be capable to recognize the dignity of each and every Palestinian and each and every Israeli, and the need to have the right to peace. Peace, which is based on human rights resolutions, based on determined borders which are recognized internationally and which are, of course, on the recognition on the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, the right to self-determination and autonomy. I hope that this committee, which has been so important to keep alive the Palestinian people's demands for their inalienable rights, I hope that this committee would clearly make it possible for parliamentarians to understand that Israel and Palestine have an opportunity for peace, and that peace, lasting and fair peace, needs to be based on the recognition of each Israeli and Palestinian to live in peace, to have peace. It needs to be based on international law and based on the recognition of the rights of the Palestinian people to have their own state. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sagwan, for that statement.
Panel is Monsieur Hubert Julien Laferrière, a French economist and a politician. As a member of the ruling La République En Marche party, he was elected to the National Assembly in 2017, representing the department of Rhône. He has previously served as mayor on the 9e arrondissement of Lyon. In his capacity of Vice President of the France-Palestine International Study Group of the National Assembly, he recently led a group of 112 parliamentarians of various parties calling on France and the European Union to act to preserve the two-state solution in the Middle East. He is also a member of the Committee on Middle East Questions at the Interparliamentary Union. Sir, you have the floor.
The speaker's mic is muted, says the interpreter.
So to unmute above the screen, you have to push the button, unmute audio. No, we still have a problem with your microphone. No, I think that we lost Monsieur Hubert.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez maintenant?
Maintenant oui.
Ok.
I turned off the computer. I got on the phone. I think it works better. I'm sorry. I had you lose a couple of minutes with the technical problem. And Senator Shawan had a very rich but very long statement. So there's not much to say really, but from the point of view of the French Parliament, what I would like to say to you is that the French Parliament, in its large majority, during the vote on the resolution in 2014 on the recognition of the state of Palestine, which was adopted with a large majority, 339 positive votes versus 351 against. So the French Parliament, I would say, is in line with the French position, which supports a two-state solution and the determination of having Jerusalem of the capital of the two states. But it's often in the avant-garde even of the French, because since 2014 even, it has wanted the French state to recognize Palestine as a state. And since then, if you like, since I've been deputy and vice chair of the France-Palestine Friendship Committee, well, I didn't hear during the presentation, I think you said that I was a deputy of La Marche region. I've no longer been that for the last year from En Marche. But I have, since I've been a deputy, France has revised its legislation and the constitution in order to intercede at the government level. But beyond regulations and law, there's the mobilization of parliamentarians vis-a-vis public opinion. And I was behind an initiative, for example, in May of last year to set up a document signed by 113 of my colleagues to call upon the government and to get it to oppose the project of annexing the Jordan Valley. You remember the endeavor supported by Donald Trump to annex, and 115 parliamentarians had mobilized at that time to say no to that project. And then the prime minister, a few months later, I was behind an initiative to alert about the Abrams agreements. Of course, it's always positive when Arabic states recognize Israel's right to exist and to have safety and security. And increasingly, more and more countries in the Arab world are recognizing the state of Israel. But the Abrams agreement was on the backs of the Palestinians because there was nothing in the agreement to support the creation of the Palestinian state. And clearly, while we're wasting all this time, and here we've called upon the President of the Republic to look at this, but while this time is being lost, Palestine's chances are being lost through settlements and annexation. All of this means that increasingly the Palestinian state, it becomes increasingly impossible to create. So I think it's important to strongly call upon our governments, because the problem I have, at least for as a parliamentarian in France, is that there's the French position in and of itself, which is fine, to say we support a two-state solution and we would like to see Jerusalem as the capital of the two states. But then, because we're a little bit soft in the area of sanctions, and because we don't want to talk about boycotting products coming from the settlements, or because we don't want to have problems with Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel. So we speak great principles, but in the meantime, the colonization, the settlements continue, and the difficulties of creating a Palestinian state continue to increase. I know that Palestinians from Palestine, or our colleagues from Palestine as elected to the French Assembly, are wondering now if the hypothesis of a Palestinian state is still possible, and maybe they need to defend the possibility of a binational state. whereby the two communities would have the same rights. It's a fairly legitimate idea, as my colleagues have been talking about apartheid, a state of apartheid today. When we talk about apartheid in France, you might end up being accused of being anti-Semitic, but objectively speaking, there is a situation of apartheid which is being strengthened there. So I think it's important, even if it's not enough, because that's the topic of our roundtable, it's important for parliamentarians to strongly mobilize. Each parliamentarian can mobilize in his or her own state, but also at the transnational level. Hence, we have initiatives such as European level initiatives where we have regular conferences of parliamentarians to have exchanges on the situation and the possibility of a common mobilization amongst parliamentarians. Here I'm talking about national parliamentarians from different European Union countries who organize meetings and meet in order to look at common ground and common prospects. And finally, at the international level, as you know, there is a worldwide parliamentarian organization. I'm a member of it, the Interparliamentarian Union. I'm a member of it representing the French, and I'm a member of the Committee on the Middle East of the Interparliamentarian Union, and where you have both Israelis and Palestinians attending those meetings. So you could imagine a resolution that would be adopted by this world body that would enjoy a consensus. And one way or another, we need to have a position on this. And in this instance, if we had a world level resolution from the Interparliamentarian Union condemning the Israeli activities and recognize Palestine's right to be a state, it would be helpful. So the difficulty, of course, is that the organization works on a unanimous basis. So the, as opposed to an organization that works with a majority of votes. Another issue which mobilizes many of the associations in France regarding the Palestinians, and which parliamentarians are seized by, and here I'm wondering about that, and that is the issue of labeling of products coming from the settlements. As you know, an important decision was handed down by the European Court of Justice. The European community had been attacked by a French businessman who had seized the Court of Justice to contest the obligation of labeling products, his wines, which came from Israeli settlements. No doubt you know about the ruling that was handed down by the European Court of Justice for the EU, which indeed confirmed the decision. It was relevant to require labeling with the mention Israeli settlement on the labels for food products, agricultural products. And then the next real topic after this is in 2017 under François Hollande's presidency. The current government is not opposed to it, but there's still opposition, and he didn't have to do this.
The council made its decision, and the law does apply as required. But after that happens, there can be either good or ill will from the French administration, from the consumer department, or from customs, which enforce this obligation to label products more stringently or less. There you have it. Once again, for the French Parliament, the important thing, beyond the position of French diplomacy with which we agree, is to sound the alarm, recall international law, recall that the government of Israel does not respect the law. The continuous eating away of Palestinian territories is creating a balkanization of what is left. And we have to do our utmost to avoid this, because it's being done to prevent the state of Palestine from seeing the light of day. So we have to push, above all, to recognize the state of Palestine, which is recognized by 136 states of the 193 members of the United Nations. When you look at the list of these states, you realize, I don't know if you've looked at it, that these are mostly quote-unquote developing countries. All of the states of Latin America are there, but not Canada, not the United States. If you look at Europe, you realize that you have all of the former East Bloc states, but in so-called Western Europe, you only see Sweden and the Vatican. So if our neighbors in Western Europe recognize Palestine, we believe that France, because of its friendship with the Arab world and support for the Palestinian cause, I recall President Chirac getting angry when the Israeli police services wanted to prevent him from shaking the hand of Palestinians. I don't know if you recall that. He said, "You want me to go back to my plane?" He was angry with the Israeli security forces who wanted him to prevent meeting Arabs while he was walking in East Jerusalem. Many of us were proud of our president. Even those who are very far on the left were proud of this president, who is more of a centrist, because he showed his solidarity with the Palestinians. And this is a spirit that we parliamentarians want to go back to by recognizing Palestinians their inalienable right to have a state. Thank you. Thank you very much, dear Hubert, for your words.
Behind schedule, but we will continue with the second panel of the forum on the topic parliamentarians and support for efforts to achieve a just solution. As I mentioned in my introduction, the flexibility of parliamentary diplomacy fosters constructive dialogue even during times of tension and crisis, as we are witnessing in these days. Parliamentary actions, including today's events, constitute a strong signal aimed at peace and support for efforts for a meaningful negotiation to arrive at a sustainable two-state solution. It is my pleasure to give the floor to our first speaker in this panel, Mr. Salomon Lecheza Tsenoli, a South African politician with more than 25 years, both legislative and executive. He is currently the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly of South Africa, having been re-elected in 2019. A Member of Parliament since 1994, he has served in several legislative committees. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Program Director and Chairperson. I really feel privileged to have been invited.
Please let me just interrupt you, because you have something between you and the camera that does not allow us to see you. Now it's fine. Please carry on.
Is it right? Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I was saying that I feel privileged and appreciate that we were invited to participate in this crucial meeting. We bring greetings and well wishes from South Africa to guests present on this platform and listeners and viewers from around the world. We convey our deepest condolences to all those who mourn their loved ones following deaths visited by the coronavirus pandemic. To Palestinians, it is a double tragedy. Deaths, injury, maiming, displacement, eviction from their ancestral places, and the destruction of their property in a particularly mean manner. This, as South Africans, reminds us of what apartheid did to us. We call on people of Israel to join in greater numbers the world's concerns and to object to this unsustainable, violent, hegemonic imposition of all kinds on the Palestinians. This continues, unfortunately, to be the legacy of a provocative approach of the previous administration in the USA. The sooner we see peace robustly imposed in this region, the better. Our freedom in South Africa is dependent on the freedom of Palestinians. Nelson Mandela's commitment and his grandson following up on his footsteps is supported by many in our country. We consider it our commitment too. We will join parliaments of the world we belong to demand peace for Palestinians and many inside Israel who also wish to see peace and support these initiatives. The Middle East deserves peace. We cannot look away from the atrocities being committed without protest. Violation of international law, of UN Security Council resolutions with impunity is unacceptable. We fully support our government's effort in all multilateral bodies to sue for peace and arrest the violence, especially even in places of worship that is going on in Gaza and other places. The people of the Middle East, we emphasize, deserve peace. We reiterate our solidarity with the Palestinian people and their right to self-determination, as well as our historical support for a free and sovereign state of Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital. We strongly believe that the situation on the ground cannot be allowed to continue unchanged, as it remains an impediment to the security, peace, stability, and development of a broader Middle East region. South Africa believes that ending the occupation is in the interest of both Israel and Palestine, and we call on both parties to take concrete steps to that end. The outstanding final status issues must be resolved through direct negotiations between the parties, with support from the international community. South Africa, through respective international platforms and engagement, continues to engage both sides to resume the peace process for a comprehensive, just, and lasting resolution on the Palestinian issue. South Africa maintains its principled position that the unilateralism threatens the global balance of power, security, and stability in a relatively volatile environment in particular. International cooperation, dialogue, and consultation is therefore critical to ensure peaceful interaction amongst the states. South Africa also wishes to reiterate that any peace plan should not allow Palestinian statehood to become an entity devoid of sovereignty, territorial contiguity, and economic viability. In this regard, a solution must be premised on a just settlement with just laws that is rights-based and that facilitate equality and equity for all who have a right to live in the territories of Israel and Palestine. This includes sovereign equality between states. There is no question that without solidarity of the world, without the solidarity of many of us in parliaments and in civil society, the prospects of this problem being resolved are distant and will not happen. We wish to urge the American people and especially their administration with the influence it has in the Middle East to use it for the benefit not only of the Middle East, but of the world. It's a costly environment that should not be allowed to continue in this way. And we thank you for this opportunity. We hope practical action will be added to our strong language that we are using to condemn this violence and the maiming of people unnecessarily. Let's do that as urgently as yesterday. We thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your remarks, especially to be concise. I will now give the floor to our next speaker, Mr. Alexandre Bollerich, a member of Parliament from Canada. Since 2011, he is representing the district of Rosemont-La Petite Patrie in the House of Commons as a member from the New Democratic Party, whose deputy leader he became in 2019. Sir, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Honor to be part of this discussion, this panel convened by the Committee for the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People. What is very troubling, and I think many guests mentioned it previously, is what is happening today with the bombings in the Gaza Strip, which are very painful and shocking to see and which trigger anger and indignation everywhere in the world. When I think that there are 223 victims on the Palestinian side and 61 children, it's all the worse. I'm going to be brief. I just wanted to say that the essential work to defend the rights of Palestinians in the Canadian Parliament is being done by a group of parliamentary friends. I've been a member of the group of Palestine Canada Friends for many years now. We've been working with the General Delegation of the Palestinian Authority, Ms. Hala Halu Abiza, and with her predecessor, Nabil Mashouf. With Mr. Mashouf, in 2018, we were able to travel with a delegation of Canadian parliamentarians to the West Bank. This made it possible for us to meet Palestinian elected officials at several levels, whether local or regional, and also humanitarian organizations and NGOs. And as Quebec and Canadian parliamentarians, we were able to see the impact of the Israeli occupation on Palestinian territories and all of the humiliations, frustrations, and discrimination that takes place on a daily basis for thousands of people. We're able to see the effect of heightened illegal settlement on Palestinian soil in farms, in villages, an olive grove that was going to disappear. The owner is going to lose his ability to produce olives because of the expansion of an illegal Israeli settlement. We also visited refugee camps that had been there since 1948 and that are practically towns and cities now. We went to an elementary school for girls, which was set up by UNRWA. It's fortunate that this program continues to work and exist. We also had a very unsettling visit to Hebron, a city of martyrs. There are 5 illegal settlements with 500 Israeli settlements protected by 1,500 Israeli soldiers. We were unable to visit a mosque even as Canadian parliamentarians. The military authorities blocked our access to the mosque. We had the authorization beforehand, but they just decided to stop us. They showed us the specific results of military occupation, the fact that Palestinians are arrested and tried by military courts is even worse. The parliamentary group made a report and sent it to the office of the Canadian Prime Minister and our Minister of Foreign Affairs, and we asked them to step up pressure. Canada supports a two-state solution with the creation of a Palestinian state. We agree with international law. So the official position of Canada is relatively good. It could be even better. But it's above all the refusal to stand by this position, which is a problem, and to really apply pressure beyond just a few words in a press statement. During our travels in 2018, most representatives said Israel must pay a price for continued illegal settlements and the multiplication of Israeli settlements. If they don't, if they feel no pressure, they'll just go on because there are no consequences. There's no impact. There must be an impact. I criticize my government for refusing to apply any real specific pressure on the government of Israel to defend the rights of Palestinians. And I'm very happy that the head of the NDP, Jagmeet Singh, asked the House of Commons and the Prime Minister this week to put an end to Canada's support for Israel as long as Israel does not respect international human rights law and the rights of Palestinians. I'll stop there, sir. Thank you again for the invitation, and I hope that together we'll be able to continue working to create a viable Palestinian state and to ensure the health and safety of Palestinian men and women. Thank you.
Merci bien, Monsieur Boléris.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bouleris, for your statement.
I now open the floor for questions from the member states who expressed the wish to ask questions, and then we will turn to the speakers for their answers. I would like to kindly request that member states focus their interventions on questions to the speakers. But I also want to announce that we just will have the support from the interpreters until noon. So after that hour, we can continue, but only in English. So I invite also those who have long statements to send it by email or WhatsApp to the committee. I will now give the floor to the permanent representative of Cuba, Ambassador Pedro Pedroso. Hello, Mr. Ambassador.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear loud and clear. Please carry on.
Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, I wish to convey our recognition to the Chairman of the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Right of the Palestinian People, Ambassador Sheikh Nian, for the organization of this event under the theme International Parliamentarian Support to the Question of Palestine. In like manner, we express our appreciation to the Director of the Division for Palestinian Rights, Mr. Elliot Tambouri, and his staff for all the support to carry out this important event. We thank the guest speakers, parliamentarians from different regions of the world, for their eloquent remarks. This event gains greater significance due to the complex situation Palestine is facing today, victim of an uncertain escalation of violence, indiscriminate and disproportionate attacks across the Gaza Strip and East Jerusalem, which has wreaked death and devastation against its population, including dozens of children. On May 15, the Cuban Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a declaration rejecting Israel's criminal aggression against the Palestinian people, and also expressing its strongest condemnation of the attack on the Al-Aqsa Mosque in occupied Jerusalem and indiscriminate bombings against the Palestinian population across the Gaza Strip by Israel military forces. In the declaration, the Cuban Foreign Ministry makes a strong call on the international community, all states, the United Nations, and particularly its Security Council, to demand the immediate cessation of the Israel's aggression. Also, on May 15, the Cuban Parliament, through its International Relations Commission, issued a declaration which I have the honor to read as follows. The International Relations Commission strongly condemns the indiscriminate bombings of the State of Israel against the Palestinian population in Gaza, which has so far resulted in the death of at least 122 people, including 31 children, as well as hundreds of wounded and extensive material damage. We demand once again the immediate cessation of the acts of violence carried out by the Israeli army against the defenseless Palestinian people and of the expansionist and colonizing policies of the State of Israel. We further denounce the continued support of the United States government for the crimes committed by Israel forces against the Palestinian civilian population. We call on parliamentarians around the world, as well as the international community in general, to act urgently and decisively to force the State of Israel to put an end to its crimes against the Palestinian population and to respect the Charter of the United Nations, international law, and the relevant resolutions of the United Nations Security Council. We emphasize the urgent need to reach a comprehensive, just and lasting solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict based on the establishment of two states, which allows the Palestinian people to exercise the right to self-determination and to have an independent and sovereign state based on the pre-1967 borders and with East Jerusalem as its capital. End of quote. Mr. Chair, as we have already stated, the moment calls for us to close ranks with the occupied and attacked Palestine. It is the responsibility of all those who are committed to peace and a just and lasting solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to act firmly and with resoluteness in support of the legitimate cause of Palestine, its right to self-determination, freedom, and independence. The Palestinian people know that they can always count on Cuba. We call for an end to the Israel's massacre and impunity. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Pedroso. Now I will give the floor to the Ambassador Mohamed Koba, Chargé d'Affaires of the Republic of Indonesia. You have the floor, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. We would like to convey our appreciation for governing this important and timely event, considering the continued deterioration of the situation in the Palestine. Indonesia has always been unwavering in our commitment to ensure the Palestinian people can enjoy their rights and to realize an independent state of Palestine. At such trying times, we would like to call on the international community to urge immediate cessation of violence, respect for international law, and protection of civilians, to provide necessary humanitarian assistance, as well as to ensure its access for the Palestinian people, to urge Israel to respect international law and relevant UN resolutions, and to stop illegal action and occupation, and to push for relaunching of negotiations to realize a two-state solution in line with the internationally agreed parameter. Having said that, we call on parliamentarians to work hand in hand with the government of with the government to contribute meaningfully in resolving the Palestinian question by raising awareness of the public on the issue, by putting necessary pressure for relevant parties, including the UN, to find a just, comprehensive, and durable solutions, as well as ensuring the alleviation of humanitarian suffering through supporting efforts to ensure humanitarian aid for Palestinian people. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. So I believe that we don't have much, no more interventions from the member states. And I believe also that we are at 13 minutes from noon. So I think that the best solution is to give back the floor to the to the panelists, and starting with those who doesn't speak in English. I mean the representative from Chile, Mr. Francisco Chachuan, and also Monsieur Hubert Julien Lafèvre, and Mr. Solomon, Mr. Alexandre Bouleris. Now, but before, I have here a question from the public, so it will be reply for the panelists. Why do member states not treat Israel the way they treat South Africa during its apartheid regime? And the second question is, why does Canada support Israel while proclaiming a progressive foreign policy? So, if you don't mind, I will give the floor to Mr. Alexandre Bouleris. You have the floor to reply. 2 minutes, I think it would be enough.
Je vais prendre moins de temps que ça, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. That's an excellent question that was asked, and it's really a shame to see the government of Canada being extremely cautious, which is freezing action in some moments in time, and then a relaunch a little bit in the United Nations. But it's true that historically, Canada has been in a position of leadership with regard to the situation in South Africa, for example, and under Mr. Mulroney at the time. Now we're far from that at this point, but I think that as parliamentarians, and I as a left parliamentarian and opposition party have more courage than the liberal government currently. I think the drama that's playing out before our eyes right now should incite all of us to show more leadership, put our cards on the table, and ask for consequences. Ask for consequences for the illegal acts committed by the Israeli government, be it now, in this specific moment in Gaza, or forced expulsions in East Jerusalem, or in expansion of settlements of the Israelis. I think it's an excellent comment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monsieur Hubert Julien Laferrière. If you want to reply to those questions, please go ahead. I've lost connection, but I think that you can proceed, Monsieur Hubert.
Oui, merci. Non,
Thank you. I'd like to respond to one of the questions that was asked. It's difficult. Someone was asking, why don't we take action vis-a-vis Israel, as we did with South Africa? Well, first, I think it's a thought that's coming to me now, and it's very personal, and it should not be seen as thorough at all or exhaustive. I don't think we have the same level of apartheid being practiced. We have to recognize that the negation of rights, well, first you have to distinguish Arab Israelis from Arab Palestinians. The system of apartheid, as it was in South Africa, the negation of rights was worse. Inequality of rights was worse in South Africa than it is today between Arab Israelis, and maybe even worse, although it's hard to be worse, than it is today between Israelis and Palestinians on the West Bank and Gaza. But there is a situation of inequality of rights indeed, and it is absolutely unacceptable, and it deserves sanctions. And of course, it's also unacceptable to have a violation of resolutions of the United Nations, equally unacceptable. And then we have the situation which I'm sure weighs heavily, and that is that states are not acting as they did in the past with South Africa. And that's because of the history behind Israel after the drama that took place in its history, and the large democracies, and not just them, many countries of the world supported the idea of an Israeli state, even though others were asking for the disappearance of Israel. So there's the idea of the right to the existence of Israel. And so that whole context, where we're leaving the area of law, quite simply, it's an emotional area. And I think that to some extent it explains why sanctions are not implemented as they were with South Africa.
Merci bien. Now I will give the floor to Mr. Francesco Chajuan, the Chilean Parliament. Well, I don't know if he's online or not, but the intention is to give the floor for the speakers who have spoken other languages than the English. But I can give now the floor to Mr. Salomon Lecheza Cenoli in order to reply to the questions. You have the floor, sir. You need to unmute your microphone, please. Now, it's still muted. You need to push the button above your image. Not yet. Sorry. So I think in the box with your video image, above there is a button with a microphone. You need to push it in order to speak. Now it's all right. No, it is not. Sorry. So if you don't mind, we move forward and then we return to you. I move to Mrs. Julie Elliott from the Parliament of the United Kingdom.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful. We've got success at last. Yes, two very interesting questions. I think Canada's response is very disappointing. I think countries are very wary at the current time. And as I think Hubert said, that it is easier in opposition to say things than it is in government. But I think it is the time when governments need to stand up to the mark. I think the issue of apartheid, like South Africa, this is a very complex situation because clearly Arab Israelis, Palestinian Arabs, there's a whole mix of things going on. And I understand why some people do compare. And Bet Islam actually very recently wrote a report on this very subject, which I think is a very even-handed exploration of the situation. I do not think the situation in Israel and the occupied territories is identical to what was happening in South Africa, but there is no doubt that what is going on in the region is affecting people in different ways. It is not a situation of equals, and clearly, you know, a child born half a mile apart, depending on if you're born into a Palestinian family in East Jerusalem or an Israeli family in West Jerusalem, those children are governed by different laws. Born in the same area, this is wrong. So I understand where the question comes from, but I think it's not quite as straightforward. But governments around the world need to take action the way they did with South Africa. However, it took something like 40, 50 years before governments began to really take action against South Africa. And that is why I think 54 years from the 67 war and the occupation, it is time for governments around the world to step up to the plate and take action. And there is no excuse not to.
Thank you so much. We will make now another attempt to call Mr. Salomon Lecheza Tsenoli. I hope that everything is fine now with his microphone. Mr. Tsenoli, you have the floor. But still we have the same problems with your microphone. But well, if you don't mind, we will proceed. So it's time now to handing back the microphone to Ambassador Nyang. But I just want to stress that on behalf of PAM, I thank you once again for this opportunity. So Ambassador Nyang, you can proceed. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Well, I think the Ambassador Nyang is not online, so on behalf of the committee, I will want to thank you all for this event.
Can you hear me?
No, he is online. Okay, please, Ambassador,
I
go
will
ahead.
start off from the sound. Can you please repeat what you have just said so that I can be on the loop, please? I can't hear you.
Yes, I was thank you everybody for their participation. Now I'm handing back the microphone to you, Ambassador, and thank you for this opportunity on behalf of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rock, once again. At some point, I was completely disconnected from the sound, and so I couldn't hear what was going on. So I thank you once again for your excellent moderation of the panels. And there have been a few glitches, but on the whole, I think it has been very enlightening and very interesting to hear our great panelists giving us their insight, their views, and this shows that the question of Palestine is still a question which is really request the highest attention of the international community. And I think the recent events which we are seeing now, very horrible events we are seeing on the ground, is for us a call for action. I think we need to do that. So, Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, and dear friends, I think, if I'm not mistaken, this concludes today's event. And I would like to reiterate the thanks of the UN Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, to the speakers, parliamentarians from across the globe, for joining us today, but even more so for the work that you do to support the cause of the Palestinian people, to attain their rights and to attain a future of peace and prosperity. Today's panels yielded very fruitful conversations and stimulated a number of recommendations and ideas that the committee will take into account. We are looking forward to the continuation of your fruitful cooperation in our shared endeavor. And a special thanks goes to our moderator, Mr. Rock, of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean, for his very adroit conducting of both panels, despite the difficulties we have with these new instruments we are using these days. But on the whole, I think the exchange has been very rewarding for all of us. I would like to also thank all the members of and observers of the committee, including my friend, the Minister Riyad Mansour, whom I listened to with interest. And I think the passionate call he made for action must be heeded. Grave, I would say. I think the word grave is not a big word for the situation. And I would also like to thank the wider UN membership for the participation, even if many of them have not taken the floor. They have been following our exchange very closely and very carefully. We thank our partners in civil society and the public at large for attending today's event. I would like to also reiterate the gratitude of the UN Committee on the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian people, to the UN USG Di Carlo for her attendance and for her remarks. I would like also to thank the Division for Palestinian Rights of the United Nations Secretariat for being so helpful in organizing this event at the request of the committee. I would like to remind everyone that a recording of this event will be shortly uploaded on the webpage of the committee, which is www.un.org/unispal, where you will be able to learn more about the question of Palestine, the work of the committee, and about other upcoming events, and also on our YouTube page. That said, I hereby declare closed the 2021 United Nations Forum on the question of Palestine under the theme International Parliamentarian Support to the Question of Palestine. I thank you all. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rock.
My pleasure.